Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to AI and Public Pensions, What the Data Tells Us. I'm Jessica Ransom, Education Associate here at NCPERS. Today's webinar is the final installment of our summer webinar series. Over the course of three webinars this summer, the series has drawn more than 870 registrations from across the public pension community. We've explored how AI is being used in pension administration, what it takes to move toward a broader organizational strategy. And today, we're closing out the series with a look at what the data tells us about AI adoption across the public pension systems. Before we get started, I do want to share a few quick housekeeping tips. At the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A tab where you can share questions, and we'll address those questions towards the end of today's webinar with the Q&A portion with Matt. And with that, Matt Eckel, our research director at the NCPERS team, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. I am Matt Eckel, Director of Research here at NCPERS. And today we're going to walk through the findings from our 2026 survey on artificial intelligence adoption and strategy in public pension administration. And I will pause for half a second here to share the presentation. Um, so this is actually the first time that NCPERS has surveyed this field specifically on AI. Folks might remember if you have attended any of our events on a couple of our most recent PRS studies, we have asked a bit about AI use in the public pension industry and community. But as we saw over the last year between our 2025 and 2026 surveys, there seemed to be a real jump in the ubiquity of public pension plans, at least beginning to grapple with the role that AI might play in their administrative tasks going forward. So we decided that we should learn a little bit more about that. And over the course of the late spring and early summer, fielded a survey with a number of more specific questions about how plans are or are not thinking about integrating AI into their day-to-day operations. So as we talk about the survey, we're going to break this down into a few kind of component parts. We will start with an overview of the plans that responded, who responded, why those responses matter, what we should be thinking about when we think about the sample. We'll talk a little bit about AI adoption by broken down by function. So asking the question, in what areas and to what purpose have public pension organizations begun to deploy AI, and in what contexts are they perhaps less able or more reluctant to do that? With that in mind, we'll talk a little bit about governance, both frameworks on paper and in practice. We did ask a couple of questions about that to try to get a sense of how different plans and how different organizations are thinking about putting guardrails around what AI can and can't do. Moving on from that, we'll discuss specifically the issue of oversight and human judgment and where that seems to be kind of falling in the overall operational cycle that organizations engage with. We'll talk a little bit about risk concerns and about barriers to AI adoption and what those barriers seem to look like, and what we might expect in terms of those barriers being overcome in future years or not, as the case may be. And then we'll close with a brief discussion of the broader outlook within the public pension community toward AI, and the kind of strategic posture that they seem to be taking. I want to just emphasize as we go that I would very much welcome questions, and I hope that folks will use the chat to ask questions, and I will address as many as I can in the time allotted. once we've gone through the initial presentation. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, the survey itself, we're looking at senior professionals from 33 public pension plans. Stats heads will note that that just gets us over the threshold of the central limit theorem. Um, we're looking at senior staff here. So these are directors, chief officers, IT leaders, people with a view across their organization. And as we can see, the funds that they represent span the full range of the field. We're looking at systems that manage under $1 billion to systems that are overseeing more than $50 billion in assets. We're looking at membership ranges from under 10,000 to plans with more than 100,000 members and beneficiaries. It's worth noting, as you're keeping this in mind, that responses were collected in May and June of this year. So this data is fairly recent, though we, of course, recognize that AI and the adoption of AI is moving very, very quickly. And it's something that we're trying to keep a pretty contemporary eye on the pulse, so to speak. Um, and I also would, point out we've got 33 plan responses here. That's a pretty good sample, but it's a snapshot. And so we want you to treat these findings as directional, showing you kind of what the field looks like at a given point in time, not necessarily giving the definitive answer on what the field is going to look like, even, a year from now, certainly 5 years from now. I'll also just mention that we did ask a mix of multiple choice quantitative questions as well as open-ended questions. So over the course of this presentation, you're going to see the occasional quote from a respondent that would come in the open-ended from one of the open-ended questions. And I do think they provide pretty crucial context to some of the closed-ended questions that we were also asking. So let's talk through a few key findings. First off, 58% of respondents rated themselves either optimistic or very optimistic about AI's impact on the public pension industry, on the public pension sector over the next decade. So that would suggest a field that is certainly cautious, but looking with a broad sense of optimism toward the prospects for AI within this industry. 96%, so pretty much the entire set of respondents, say that human judgment remains the primary driver where AI is used. People are being kept in the loop, and plans understand the necessity for keeping people in the loop, given the importance of getting things right, given the heavy fiduciary responsibility that they hold. When we're thinking about barriers to AI adoption. 63%, so the plurality of respondents cite a lack of in-house expertise as their top barrier to AI adoption. So once again, there are issues making sure that there is sufficient human judgment in the room to best take advantage of AI as a tool. 43% name cybersecurity as their top risk concern. I think that's something that reflects a long-standing and growing recognition over the past couple of decades, even before AI has entered the picture, that cybersecurity and thinking about digital security more broadly is something that pension plans need to be paying close attention to. And AI seems to have only further highlighted and in some ways turbocharged that set of concerns. 69% say that they require human review before AI outputs are in any way acted upon. So once again, we're looking at a system that, or systems that are cautiously embracing or potentially thinking about cautiously embracing AI tools, but keeping people very much in the loop. And 64% haven't yet made formal decisions as organizations about where AI belongs in, for example, member-facing communication, which is one of the areas in which AI has, or in which we've seen the most enthusiasm about potential adoption of AI. But we can see that organizations are still very much cautious in their approach to actually integrating AI tools into the parts of their operations that are public-facing, consumer-facing. So let's get down to brass tacks. where is AI actually being used? As we see, uh, AI itself, actually in active use or in the piloting or testing phases, is less than 50% across all of the types of tasks that the survey goes through, right? Member communication and customer service, administrative task automation, fraud detection, actuarial forecasting, all on down the line, right? Um, but we're seeing that in a number of these places, plans are actively considering implementing AI tools within the next couple of years. So that would suggest that we are potentially on the threshold of a real shift in the ubiquity and importance of AI tools when it comes to day-to-day operations. Um, and we can see that both active use and probably the most additional, consideration for active use is concentrated in that member communication and customer service, as well as administrative task automation space, along with, to a certain extent, fraud detection and cybersecurity. These are the sorts of things that seem like they are the most likely to be sort of early adopted by public pension plans. Um, and if you think about it, it makes sense, right? We're looking at types of tasks that are extraordinarily important, member communication in particular, but perhaps don't have the same degree of downside risk that you might expect in something like investment opportunity, data modeling, actuarial forecasting, regulatory compliance, reporting, that sort of thing. Um, so I think that this makes sense and once again reflects an appropriate degree of caution that we're seeing across the industry overall when it comes to implementing AI solutions and integrating AI tools. So what are funds actually doing? Well, we've got a few quotes here, right? We've begun evaluating Microsoft 365 Copilot. The tool is primarily being used to assist with drafting emails, summarizing meetings and documents, preparing presentations, generating initial content for reports, right? AI has been used for communication purposes in member outreach letters, internal and external newsletters, board letter crafting, presentation development, job description development, interview question generation, and paraphrasing raw notes from conferences. Um, and then I think this last quote here is really key. AI is being piloted as an administrative support tool. Performance has been as expected with a mid-level of satisfaction. The accuracy and validity of output is greatly affected by the quality of the prompt used. So I think these quotes that we got reflect a couple of different things at once. First, they really do highlight what we were looking at in the previous slide, that when we're talking about the integration of AI into day-to-day operations, what we're mostly talking about at this point is the integration of AI into customer service and into streamlining and making easier the kind of internal day-to-day administrative functions that can take up a lot of time and that obviously require quite a bit of human review, but are perhaps a little bit lower stakes when it comes to the individual decision points, and the individual tasks being completed. Um, the other thing that I wanted to point out is that last quote, right? The accuracy and validity of output is greatly affected by the quality of the prompt used. I think that this reflects both an industry understanding as well as what I think a lot of us who have begun to dabble with AI tools sort of understand intuitively, which is that inputs produce outputs, right? AI is not magic. It is a potentially useful tool that we're still figuring out how to best apply in different contexts. Um, and folks in the pension industry, the public pension industry, seem to recognize that, right? So just like any other tool, understanding how to properly prompt a large language model to give you useful information and useful output is incredibly important. And that's something that we're seeing recognized in our own data. Um, the one sort of divide that definitely does show up in our data, right, does come with size and scale. When we are talking about smaller funds with fewer than 10 staff, there are resource constraints in terms of having folks who are going to be dedicated IT professionals with a real expert level knowledge of how to best use AI. Um, Smaller funds describe something fundamentally different from larger funds, right? We do not have the staffing resources to do so internally. We have not identified any areas where we plan to implement a third-party AI integrated system. Smaller plans are being especially cautious. And I think that this is, again, speaks to an industry overall that is approaching AI with a kind of cautious optimism, with an eye toward the responsibility that they have to make sure that they're getting it right. And so when it comes to smaller plans that maybe don't have the staffing resources to integrate this stuff quite as quickly, we're seeing that recognized. And as such, we're seeing smaller plans be a little less aggressive and a little less at the forefront, so to speak, of AI tool adoptions. Whereas large funds are more likely to have the capacity to, for example, pilot different tools, evaluate them systematically, and implement them in a way that is going to be successful. When we think about governance, on paper, there are the very beginnings of government or of governance frameworks that we see beginning to kind of percolate into some of these systems, right? So when it comes to AI governance, 43%, and that's the plurality of respondents, use AI under some set of internal staff guidelines, right? So these are developed to varying degrees. Um, and then a much smaller segment of the respondents have some kind of formal board-approved AI policy, and an equally small percentage of respondents have nothing. Right. So this would suggest that most parts of the industry are still trying to figure out at the formal level and at the level of kind of organizational best practices how to use AI. But they're certainly thinking about developing guidelines that are going to make it effective. We aren't looking at organizations that are just ignoring the problem for the most part. So the plurality are applying existing tech or vendor risk policies, for example, that maybe have been designed for situations beyond AI, or using informal case-by-case judgment. And then in practice, one thing that the survey asked, if your team discovered a significant error, output, fraud flag, member communication, what would actually happen? Um, and the most common answer is some version of the idea that accountability is going to sit with the employee who actually used the tool, right? So organizations are very much still working through this. Some have, for example, as we see here, implemented some kind of pre-approval policy where AI use needs to be pre-approved and isn't just left up to individual employee discretion. Some organizations are still working through the notion of what governance is going to look like and what kinds of guardrails need to be put in. But the most common theme that we see expressed throughout the survey is the importance of human review and the importance of keeping humans in the loop of any process that involves AI to any degree. And that might involve applying existing internal controls. It might involve developing new ones. So to that point, 69% require human review before AI outputs are acted upon. We see that 27% have no formal oversight practices. The least common is any kind of independent third-party model validation or regular performance audits. We don't see that emerging as a particularly common set of practices yet. Um, and so oversight practices so far have been more procedural than they are technical. Um, and that's a distinction that's going to matter as tools move from, drafting emails into the types of functions where the output might be harder to quickly kind of sanity check. 96% of respondents describe human judgment as primary when it comes to where AI is used. Half of our respondents say that AI outputs are one input among several when it comes to organizational decision making or product production. 46% say that AI is used only to surface information, not to make recommendations. So there are some organizations we're seeing that are using AI almost a little bit more like an advanced search and research tool, but aren't relying on AI to make any kind of policy or procedural judgment. I think the quote here is particularly relevant. You need the expert to be able to gauge the reasonableness of the output. I don't believe AI will ever be trustworthy of 100% accuracy, right? Or to the point of 100% accuracy. Um, and again, I want to emphasize that both with respect to this survey as well as conversations that we've been having with folks over the last year, folks in the public pension community do seem to really understand that the stakes are pretty high here when it comes to integrating AI into day-to-day operations, into systems that are making fiduciary judgments about people's livelihoods and people's retirement savings. Um, and there is an understanding that an overly hasty adoption of AI could really damage trust in a way that would be difficult to recover if there were, a really negative experience with AI. So caution is definitely the word of the day, as much as this technology has generated quite a bit of excitement and buzz. So when we think about what's actually holding systems back from AI adoption, and we gave folks a lot of different options as well as some open-ended ones to think about, lack of in-house technical expertise to evaluate or oversee AI, data security and member privacy concerns, organizational culture or risk aversion, different way of saying similar things. Insufficient or poor quality data infrastructure, cost of procurement and implementation, regulatory uncertainty in terms of what's even really allowed, difficulty demonstrating an ROI with respect to AI tools, which are not free. Concerns about vendor lock-in or dependence, which I think is, something that we got from a few people and may well make sense in the context of an emerging and, still developing technology, as well as a little bit on the board or trustee resistance or unfamiliarity with AI tools. And as we can see from the chart here, um, the most frequent response is a lack or comes to a lack of in-house technical expertise to evaluate or oversee AI. One thing that we've heard again through this survey, as well as just in conversations with people, indeed we've heard it, I think, a little bit over the course of a couple of the other webinars this summer, is that because AI is an emerging technology, there is a limited pool of folks who can be hired by an organization that are really going to have the kind of expertise needed to confidently integrate AI into really complex and really consequential operational practices. Um, and I think it's really encouraging that plans recognize that. So I think as we're looking at, for example, hiring practices, and we're kind of looking at the labor market um, over the next 2 or 3 years, I think one thing that we're all really interested in and are going to keep a very close eye on is what are we seeing with respect, whether it's IT departments or elsewhere in the organization, are we going to see any kind of a build out in with respect to staffing and with respect to trying to kind of tech up on the expertise needed to take best advantage of this new technology? Just behind that lack of in-house technical expertise, we see data security and member privacy concerns. I think that this is a particularly opportune week to be talking about this, as there have been a couple of stories in the news lately about AI bots kind of breaking containment, so to speak, and behaving in ways that the people who were prompting them didn't necessarily expect or want. And when we're talking about organizations that have that control extremely sensitive information, that is, I think, unavoidably a concern. And again, it's, I think, heartening that folks who are answering our survey clearly seem to understand that. Um, and then we have the sort of second tier of concerns, in particular organizational culture and risk aversion, which, as I think we've been talking about this entire time, has its upsides and downsides with respect to a new technology like this. Um, Insufficient or poor quality data infrastructure. Needless to say, implementing AI properly is something that is likely going to require a robust foundation of data and of IT resources to make sure that that's going to be successful. Um, and then there are concerns about cost. But I would overall emphasize that this mostly doesn't seem to be a budgetary issue when it comes to, barriers to integrating AI into pension systems. Um, our data suggests that it's much more about having the right people in place, having the right policies in place, and having the degree of understanding of the tool necessary to be confident that it's going to do what it's being deployed to do, and that it's going to generate a real upside for the organization and for organizational members. What are leaders worried about? Well, this gets back to what we were just talking about, cybersecurity vulnerabilities from AI systems or from AI vendors. There is certainly a concern about data quality, producing unreliable follow-up results. As I mentioned earlier, we do see a real recognition that AI output is only going to be as good as the AI input, whether that comes from, properly understanding how to prompt an LLM to give you the information and the results you need, or whether that comes from, just making sure that the underlying data quality is there, so that AI tools are working with the best raw materials, so to speak. Um, Model errors with long-term funding consequences are cited somewhat less frequently, but we also see that very few, at least of the respondents to this survey, are yet using AI in the kinds of functions where that risk would be most manifest. And I will also just note here, this is far from the last research that NCPERS is going to be doing around AI, and indeed, our next order of business, so to speak, is going to be looking at how people are thinking about integrating AI into the investment side of things. As we've seen from this survey, that's something that is more speculative at this point in most organizations so far, but it's also something that organizations are thinking about. And so at NCPERS, we want to understand how that evolving conversation is going on. So something to keep an eye out for later this year. Um, and I think the quote here is particularly relevant, right? How should fiduciary responsibility and accountability be allocated when AI-assisted processes contribute to decisions affecting member benefits, investments, or actuarial assumptions? So the overall outlook when it comes to AI, because we just asked people straight up, how are you feeling about AI in public pensions? Um, is one of cautious optimism, right? 54% describe themselves of respondents describe themselves as cautiously optimistic when it comes to the role that AI can play in public pensions. A much smaller amount call themselves very optimistic. We have a degree of uncertainty, right? And not that much pessimism, which for a technology that in the broader national conversation, I think has gotten quite a bit of has generated quite a bit of controversial discourse, certainly over the last year or two. I think it's notable that folks in the pension community are, cautious in their application, but overall optimistic when it comes to the potential for AI to have some really positive transformative effects on how those organizations are working day to day. The long-term challenge is not whether AI can be implemented, but how it can be implemented responsibly. It's worth noting that only 7% of organizations have reached a clear strategic position around AI and are currently executing against it. So, for the most part, again, we're seeing a pattern of kind of fact-finding and information processing at the moment. The remainder are waiting on peers and regulators. They're working through the question, or they have AI on the agenda, but without the kind of dedicated attention that would produce a sort of coherent strategic outlook. And so this reflects where the field is, not necessarily where it's headed. This is a question that I'll be really interested to see if we have a chance to deploy this survey again in a year or so, where people come back on it. Because as I think everybody understands, this is a really fast-moving technology, and the degree to which it's being adopted. Um, Not just in the public pension space, but across the economy, is really quite unprecedented. We had for those of you who might have made the public pension funding forum, excuse me, out in Chicago last week. We had a great presentation by an academic, Paulo Carvalho, who noted that, as he was talking through the ups and downs of AI, noted the extraordinary speed with which AI tools have begun to diffuse their way through the economy at both the institutional level and at the individual level. It's one reason to believe that, maybe AI hasn't actually gotten out over its skis at the the capital investment level. Um, and so, given the speed of adoption, and given how whipsawed people have felt by AI over the last couple of years, I think it's notable that we're still very much in the stage where we see organizations are kind of preparing for how best to integrate AI into their operations, but they recognize that it's here. It's not something that is happening in the distant or even medium term. These are decisions that need to start getting made. And so, what does that mean for NCPERS members and other folks in the industry? Um, Say there's four areas for potential kind of focused guidance and perhaps peer learning. Practical governance frameworks that work in practice and not just on paper. Developing the kinds of rules, regulations, and guardrails to make sure that AI is going to be deployed responsibly and safely, and in a way that's going to increase efficiency and utility. Evaluation capacity, right? Developing frameworks for assessing vendors, for assessing models, for assessing contracts, so that folks understand what it is they're buying and what it can and can't do. Um, Getting defined benefit specific use case guidance. Where does AI fit in the context of, in particular, a DB pension plan, and where does it not? And peer learning and benchmarking, right? What have early adopters learned? And what lessons can the broader public pension community take from those, excuse me, from those learnings? And that again is something that here at NCPERS, with this webinar series this summer and with the research that we're doing, we're trying to make sure we're going to be a resource for the community and can provide some of that information. So, that was a relatively brief rundown of kind of what we found. I really appreciate everybody taking a little time to kind of go through it with me. And it seems like we've got some questions in the chat. So, let's see what we've got here. All right. How do you suggest overcoming the doomerism related to AI from, let's call it, informed users, executive, legal, security, etc.? So I think this is a good question, right? And I say this as somebody who, looking at the data here, doesn't really see, quote unquote, doomerism as necessarily being justified, but certainly sees caution as being justified. Um, I think when it comes to overcoming what we might think of as perhaps an overly reflexive or kind of anti-AI stance, emphasizing some of exactly what we've been talking about here, right? That AI is a tool, not a magic trick. It's something that, with proper governance frameworks, can be responsibly and I think efficiently integrated into pension organizations. And I think keeping an eye on what peers are up to, and keeping an eye on the ways in which AI has been successfully deployed, including as well as perhaps cases where that success has been wanting. Um, I think keeping an eye on what's actually going on, and not getting too focused on some of the sort of 30,000 foot level, almost sort of philosophical doomer type discussions that happen. Um, I think that is going to provide a kind of or help develop the kind of culture that will be able to integrate AI in a way that is responsible and positive. Um, which AI tools were considered by the plans? This is a very good question. It's one that I unfortunately don't have much data in front of me yet. Anecdotally, we've had conversations with plans that have used a number of different LLMs or developed, using those as a baseline, developed bespoke models. I would point folks to one of our earlier webinars from earlier in the summer where some folks from New York spoke to the specific models they were using. This survey didn't touch on the precise models being used. That's certainly something that, as we continue to do some research in this space, we are very interested in learning more about. So I guess I would say watch this space. But I'm sorry I don't have better information there. Do smaller plans use outside contractors who are using AI, and they will need to monitor their contractors' use of AI? Um, so I think this survey would suggest that the answer is yes and yes. We did mention that smaller plans are somewhat less likely to have in-house resources, but given the speed with which AI tools have begun to proliferate throughout the economy as a whole, and certainly throughout many of the vendors that plans use, I think it is going to be quite imperative to not only develop policies around an organization's own internal use of AI, but it's going to be important to develop policies around contractors' use of AI and around external vendors' use of AI. And I think that that the data here certainly suggest that that's something that organizations are just beginning to wrap their head around how to maybe go about doing. And it does speak to the importance of kind of staffing up and teching up and making sure that there are people around with the expertise and background to be able to help make informed decisions, both in terms of internal AI adoption and in terms of the kinds of controls that are put on vendors and outside organizations. Um, let's see. Given the limited number of experts on AI in general, let alone sitting hidden in our user base, do you have any suggestions on how to help better build out that expertise so we can chip away at the expertise need? Um, so, I mean, I'm not a personal or I'm not a consultant on this issue specifically. I do think that one of the things we're going to be keeping a really close eye on over the next year or two is how, if at all, public pension plans are beginning to budget for AI-specific staffing needs. As with most things, this is something that resources will need to be committed to. And that's something that, frankly, it wouldn't surprise me over the next year or two if we don't start seeing those resources getting committed in a much more systematic way. But that's something that hasn't shown up quite yet in our data, and is something that we're going to be keeping a really close eye on going forward, because certainly the foundations for that kind of shift do seem to exist. Let's see. Considering the AI landscape is quickly evolving, what do you expect to be the future outlook for AI usage in the public pension space within the next year or 5 years? So as I mentioned at the beginning, this survey is a snapshot and gives us, kind of limited data on the directionality of AI usage. But what I can say is we've seen a massive leap in, at the very least, consideration of, and to a certain extent, adoption of AI tools, even over the last year. And I think there is every reason to believe that we will continue to see, for example, a lot of those initial, considerations of AI adoption eventually lead to actual adoption of AI tools. Based on this data, based on some preliminary conversations we've been having, I think it's likely that some of the administrative and kind of consumer-facing functions that Folks have reported AI as being probably the best developed at this point, are likely going to continue to be kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to AI adoption. We have seen much more caution around some of the more kind of consequential back end processes and decisions being turned over to AI tools. So my guess would be over the next year, we're going to continue to see that sort of that part of the of AI adoption, that subset of tasks, continue to kind of strengthen or AI to be strengthened in those areas. Um, but very much again, stay tuned because this is something that we're going to be monitoring closely over the next year or two. And I am as interested as you are to see where this ends up going. Is there any legislative activity to curtail pension systems using AI? To my knowledge, I don't believe so. No evidence thereof has come across my desk. I don't want to say definitively that there's nothing because there are a lot of legislatures and a lot of stuff to monitor, and it's not something that I've done a comprehensive dive into. But it doesn't seem to be something that is immediately bubbling to the surface as a concern, at least in the conversations we've had and in the data that we've collected so far. Let's see. We have some folks. We currently use Copilot and ChatGPT for assistance with financial analysis of money manager reports. Are there any best practice tips for this use? Um, we could likely put you in touch with folks once we've done a little bit more research ourselves who have begun to integrate AI into these sorts of tasks and would be very happy to follow up after the webinar if that would be helpful. I don't know that this survey and our data so far necessarily points to sets of best practices. It does point to the fact that organizations recognize that best practices are necessary here, right? And that developing the kind of governance frameworks that allow for exactly that kind of process to be safely and efficiently implemented are really important. But I don't want to overpromise beyond that. All right. Do we have other questions here? Anybody else with any other thoughts? Let's see. What is your position on co-browse? I don't have one. I'm sorry if that's an unsatisfying answer, but and then shouldn't members be notified if any plan information was prepared with or by AI? Um, Again, I think that's something that, organizations themselves will have to develop and should develop some clear internal guidelines around. Um, my initial reaction to that is it depends on what sorts of information we're talking about, and it depends on what prepared by AI means. And one thing that I will repeat is our survey would suggest that overall there is an overwhelming kind of push toward keeping human beings involved in any process that AI is also involved in. So I think that um, to the extent that AI is involved, it is something that's a tool rather than as a replacement for human judgment. And I would imagine that that's something that would want to be communicated with plan members as well, um, both informally and formally when it comes to policy development. All right. Jessica, I don't think we have any other questions here.
Sure, you answered everything. But before we close out, I want to leave everyone with one final takeaway. Based on everything we've seen in the survey, what is one thing you think public pension systems should be thinking about now as they consider what comes next with AI?
And to that point, actually, we do have one final question, which I think actually dovetails nicely with NCPER's own upcoming priorities here. Currently, AI is used in communications and reporting. How soon do you think AI will be used on the investment or actuarial side? Um, I won't give you a prediction there, but I will say that this is NCPER's next research project when it comes to AI, doing a deeper dive on precisely that question, what the status of AI is on the investment side, on the actuarial side. So on that very specific question, watch this space because I do think we'll have some data for you before long.
Awesome. Great way to wrap that up. While the webinar has come to a close, we do encourage you to continue the conversation. Please feel free to email any questions that you may have to research@ncpers.org. We are so glad that you all joined us today. And as Matt said, stay tuned. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.